Did people misread Diana when she arrived on the scene? You characterized her in a certain way and people's reactions to her. I just wonder, since you knew her, and since you knew the time so well, did people misread her?
Well, I think she was so young, she was a work in progress. I mean, the interesting thing about Diana was how she evolved. She always had the most extraordinary sense of media from the very, very beginning. She knew exactly how to give the media the pictures they wanted, the charm that they wanted. And as she became a very professional princess, she also figured out how to make the media work for her in all her wars with the palace.
Right.
So she did change, it's true. She became much more canny. And by the end of her life, when I last met her in July of '97, she was a real media professional. I mean, she talked a lot at lunch about how irritated she was with the royal family for being so clueless, as she put it, about media and about how they needed to be more accessible, more professional, more aware of what the media could do for them, as well as what the media, how the media needed to be avoided. Right. So she was very, very shrewd about that.
Well, let me ask the question from another angle. Did Charles know what he was getting into?
Charles absolutely didn't know what he was getting into. What was very funny in a way was that the Spencers, her family, were so great on paper, as they say. You know, I mean, they're 500 years old, at least. I mean, had been wired into the royal family from the 14th century, but they were also a family that was sort of riven with sort of complexity and strife. You know, her mother left home when she was 6. There was a bitter divorce with her father. Her grandmother testified in court against her mother in the custody suit, which left a terrible sort of vindictive feeling between Diana's mother and her own mother. Then the stepmother, Rain Spencer, comes in, and she is Diana's hate figure in Diana's life, and they all hate Rain Spencer. I mean, this family was at war with itself and everybody else,
right.
And was a real hornet's nest, actually, because they were an emotional family, a very tempestuous family, really. Diana, you know, was brilliant at her role, but all of this family strife had left a kind of what I think of as a sort of primal wound in her that kept surfacing in her life, that her need for love and her lack of love in her life and her lack of security and her lack of role models, even despite this background. If Diana had met a man who was warm and reassuring and loving to her and had genuinely been in love with her, I think she would have been a pretty happy woman living in the country with her kids. Unfortunately, Charles's infidelity was almost, you could not select a worse situation for her to marry into. Here was a girl who craved security, craved emotional warmth, who married into a family in which at the age of 19 she discovers her husband's not in love with her, is in love with somebody else, and the rest of the family are unbelievably rejecting and hard-faced. So it played into every insecurity that she had.
And by the way, she was cut off to a large degree from any intimate communication with people outside the walls, right?
She was isolated. She was alone with older people. She was not a girl with many intellectual resources at all. So she was utterly alone, really, and it played into her anxiety, into her paranoia. And I think in a way, for Diana, what we have to be admiring of is that she played her role so successfully. I mean, the truth is that she was superb and consummate professional every time she went out the door. I mean, she never did anything except look her best. She never let her public down. She always performed her role superbly well. And if she was going a little kind of crazy behind palace walls, well, frankly, who can blame her? Because everything she had to deal with was so intensely sad, really, for a young, beautiful woman who'd only looked for emotional success.
Was there any way for her to get out? Could she have hit the reset button at some point there when she realized all this was going south?
Well, the awful thing for her was, I mean, for anybody else, yes, they could just simply think, you know what, I made a mistake, and you know, I'm going to get out of here. But of course, for her, there was a whole constitutional monarchical structure around her.
Right.
Which made her understand. I mean, I say that, you know, the dream became the scream, and it's true. I mean, you know, the wedding was this fairy tale event, and from the moment it was over, it was almost like she woke up from a kind of insulin coma and realized that it was all just dank and horrible.
And permanent.
Permanent. I mean, you know, I think of that great Edgar Allan Poe poem, you know, they sealed her living in the tomb, and that's kind of, I think, how she felt, that literally she had woken up in a tomb.
Right.
And everybody around her was old and cold and rejecting, and there she was in Balmoral for her honeymoon for 6 weeks. It was raining. It was, you know, she was required to wear a formal dress for dinner every night with the Queen and all the courtiers. I mean, you could do it once or twice, but imagine doing it every single night for 6 weeks when you just got married and you're 19 years old. I mean, she wants to stop at the port and go shopping. And when the Britannia docks, the Crown is in town. So you can't dock and go to Capri and think, I'm going to go, you know, have a coffee and look around the shops.
There's no being incognito.
There is no being incognito. You have to, the Queen of the country has to come, the President of the country, the Prime Minister. I mean, it's a total nightmare.
Yeah.
And she just hadn't really considered that.
You make it sound like a job that no one would want.
Well, it's true. And I think that most of what the royals have to do is stuff that you would just, you know, it's everything you don't want to do about a job. It's stuffy. It's inauthentic, really. Everybody's on their best behaviour. You know, she had to be called Your Royal Highness. I mean, when I did an event once with Prince Charles in California, and it really hits you how when you're with Prince Charles, everybody's bowing and scraping, literally. I mean, they're screaming with laughter if he says anything remotely funny. If he tells a story, people listen intently. If he wants to, you know, have a different dish. I mean, he has his own cutlery, he travels with all of his own silver. I mean, it's really pretty unbearable.
Right.
And people say, which irritates me, oh, she knew what she was getting into. I mean, her family knew the royals. Well, how can you know what you're getting into at 19? I have a 16-year-old daughter. And, you know, I consider her a very lively, mature young girl, like Diana felt she was. But she's not realistic at all. I mean, if you told her she was going to get married to her prince and he was adored her, and you know, and the prince was smothering her in attention, I mean, of course she would be thrilled, and she wouldn't think beyond that. Really, she'd say, "Oh no, you're wrong. It's all going to be great."
So you're not hoping that Harry or Wills comes to your house to pluck your daughter and?
I think it's a fate worse than death. I really do. I mean, and I feel for Kate Middleton, William's girlfriend,
right?
Because, you know, people think wrongly that Prince William recently gave her up. But actually, my sources tell me the reverse, actually. They tell me that she became extremely nervous about this wedding.
Couldn't bear it.
Well, she felt the cold fingers around her. You know, that apparently William wanted to make her a presenter at the concert recently. And the Queen put her foot down and said, no, absolutely not. We are not having another media queen like Diana.
Wow.
But what does a beautiful young woman do in the age of multimedia? Because the fact is that any girl who's William's girlfriend is going to find herself on the cover of every magazine. Is going to be the pin, and she's a star, and it's not necessarily even her choice. But if she performs her well, it's exactly the Diana catch-22. If she performs her role well and brilliantly, they all resent it, the royal family. She then upstages the prince, and you know, if she doesn't, then she's a failure. So what does she do?
And then they get the negative coverage on that side.
And then they get the negative coverage. Of course, the difference is that William himself is a very attractive and charismatic young man, which Charles wasn't. I mean, for Charles, I think that as corrosive as the Camilla issue in their marriage was Charles's absolute inability to cope with Diana upstaging him.